Today is the non-tender deadline. Who is Atlanta going to keep, and who might they trade for? We'll break it down next. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Friday, November 22nd. Your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on Twitter, Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and an Instagram as well. You can also find all of my written work, bravestoday.com, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. And I want to get into today's non-tender deadline. I believe it's 8 p.m. Eastern. Maybe it's 7 p.m. Eastern, is when you're required to make your non-tender decisions. Players who are arbitration eligible or are pre-arbitration, they are you have their control, their contractual control, but you have to officially offer them a contract. If you do not offer them a contract by the end of the day today, by this deadline, they become free agents. And deadlines spur action. So this is a common catalyst for trades. We saw some of these trades go down last year by the Atlanta Braves. The non-tender deadline or close to it, that's when Kyle Wright got moved to the Royals for Jackson Kowar, ended up being, along with prospect Cole Phillips, one of the pieces traded to the Seattle Mariners for Jared Kelenic. And I'll remind you, both Kowar and Phillips had Tommy John and have not pitched, I don't think, at all for Seattle since the trade. You also saw that big 5-player deal for non-tender candidates for Atlanta. Michael Soroka, Nicky Lopez, Braden Shoemake, and Jared Schuster, I think. And then a prospect, Riley Goins maybe, was a 5-player deal that went to the White Sox to get Aaron Bummer. Now, deals that big are not incredibly common, right? That's not something you're probably going to see a lot of today, but you'll see a lot of small trades where a team was going to non-tender a guy. And because he's going to be owed money that they didn't want to pay, somebody else may want him, and it may be cash considerations. It may, which is limited, how much it can be. It may be, a back end of your top 30 prospect, or it may just be an organizational guy. But you'll see some moves. And in the second half of the show, I'm going to go down a list of some of the guys I think Atlanta could look at acquiring. No guarantees here, but it feels like that's a situation where AA may step in and say, hey, that guy has more value to us than he does to you. We're cool with either picking him up at the projected salary or reaching some sort of deal with him between now and the beginning of the season. Because even if you tender a contract to an arbitration-eligible guy today, you don't have to go to arbitration with him. You can negotiate, and you can go back and forth. Now, most teams now are trial and file teams, which is where when you are set for arbitration, when you have reached an impasse and you reach the arbitration deadline of have a deal in place or go to arbitration, Atlanta will file their salary number, and then they will just wait for the trial. They will stop negotiating at that point unless it's a multi-year deal. But just because you tender a guy today does not mean he's going to make that amount. It does not even necessarily mean that he's going to stay with you. He could still move, but this is a deadline that does spur action. So, most of the pre-arbitration guys on the roster, I say most, the only one we're expecting as of now to make the Major League roster pre-arbitration is Spencer Schwellenbach. The Braves have so many long-term control guys that most of the roster is already locked in on their contract. Spencer Schwellenbach obviously is going to be tendered a contract for next season. The team can pay him the minimum. They may choose to give him a small bump in salary, but they can pay him the league minimum if they want to. There are 5 remaining arbitration-eligible guys. There were more. This is something where Cavan Biggio was sent down to the minors. he elected free agency. He was owed what was going to be way too much money for his skill set and what he did, because it's all based off previous arbitration numbers. But you've got 5 guys who are arbitration eligible on the roster right now. I'm going to say 3 locks and not 2 locks here. Dylan Lee, 30 years old. He's projected, this is an MLB Trade Rumors projection, $1.2 million. There is zero reason not to pick up Dylan Lee. You need lefties in the pen with AJ Minter in free agency. Zero reason not to offer Dylan Lee a contract. Despite what a lot of people think, I think Jarred Kelenic is a lock to get a contract. He's projected at $2.3 million in arbitration. That is not a ton of money for Atlanta to pay. And in my opinion, you don't take on all of that dead money you took on last year on Jarred Kelenic just to give up on him after one season. Now, do I think they go into the year with him as an everyday starter? Not necessarily, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But I do think he's a lock to have a contract offered to him. Again, the projected arbitration figure, $2.3 million. Huascar Ynoa is the third guy, projected at $825,000 in his second year of arbitration. He was a Super 2 last year. He's barely pitched. This is something where you have a little bit of time at the beginning of the season where you can actually let him go and you only pay a prorated portion. It's a whole kind of complicated thing in the CBA. But the point is, I don't see a reason why they would not tender Huascar Ynoa, because we saw when he was healthy before he punched that bench in Milwaukee, what he can do at the major league level. I think at worst, you could see him as a bullpen piece this year. Your 2 real questions, Ramon Laureano and Griffin Canning. Okay, so we're going to take these one at a time. Ramon Laureano, it's an interesting path to get here, right? I believe he was waived by Oakland. The Guardians took him off of waivers. This is August of 2023. They released him in May of this year, and the Braves signed him. And statistically, he was much better in Atlanta than he ever was in Cleveland. Across 72 games, across parts of 2 seasons, the end of 23 and the start of 24, Ramon Laureano batted .209 in Cleveland. He also batted, across 67 games in Atlanta, he batted .296 with an .832 OPS. I do think Atlanta brings Ramon Laureano back. This is something with Ronald Acuna Jr. not necessarily going to miss the start of the year. We don't know when he'll be back. We don't know how effective he'll be. Everybody remembers 22 down the stretch where he needed off days. He was dealing with swelling in the knee. He wasn't 100% most of that season. I do think it's likely that the Braves bring Ramon Laureano back. I do want to point out, though, one, if you acquire somebody in left field, it may not be a guarantee that you bring back Ramon Laureano, because Jarred Kelenic would start, I assume, in right. The new acquisition in left. You have Eli White as a 4th outfielder, and then you will get Ronald back, which means your left field acquisition would be 3, and Kelenic would be your 4. And Laureano looked good on the conventional stats with Atlanta. I do think this is a little bit misleading, and I do worry about if he can replicate what he did, and if it's a good idea to ask him to do it at a salary of $6.1 million. With the Braves, Ramon Laureano struck out 28.3% of the time. His walk rate was 3.5%. I don't have to tell you, not good numbers. By comparison, he was atrocious with Cleveland, 38.6% strikeout rate, but he walked 8.5% of the time. He walked at league average, which is 8.5. With Atlanta, he struck out 6% more than league average, and he walked less than half of the league average rate. I do think there are some reasons to be concerned, and Atlanta has to decide, can Ramon Laureano do enough to justify $6 million? And we talked about this, I think, last week. The money situation for Atlanta is interesting because you have to figure out, one, where are you dedicating your money? If you are, in fact, planning on needing to pay for 2 starters, one in free agency, one via trade, whatever it might be, do they decide we don't need to spend $6 million on Ramon Laureano? Even if they non-tender him, he is a free agent. Maybe they sign a multi-year deal. Maybe they sign a deal for less than the arbitration figure. But my expectation as of Friday morning, as of this morning, is that Atlanta tenders Ramon Laureano and works out something with him prior to arbitration. I don't know. This is the final year before he becomes a free agent next season. I don't know how comfortable they would be paying him, but I feel like his defensive versatility, his range for some reason was atrocious in StatCast. 8th percentile range, -6 outs above average. But his arm value, 100th percentile. Arm strength, 89th percentile. And I feel like his range was fine in Atlanta. I think your opening day outfield, barring a signing, is Kalnick in left, Laureano in right, Harris in center, with Ronald joining after the first month or 2 of the season, and Laureano entering a timeshare with Kalnick until somebody takes the job like Laureano did last year. So as of now, I think that's where we are. But it is entirely possible the Braves non-tender Ramon Laureano because maybe they don't like the walk rate and the strikeout rate and some of the things that we mentioned. The other question here is Griffin caning. We've talked before both on this show and on the Substack in the newsletter about can the Braves fix Griffin caning. They've got to figure out where his velocity went. They've got to work on the locations and the movement of the fastball a bit. I think some of that fastball movement will come back with his velocity. I think those two things are related. But he's not been good the last couple seasons. He missed 22 because of injury. 23, 4.32 ERA. 24, 5.19 ERA. Now, he picked up over 120 innings in 23 and over 170 innings in 24, which is useful. He led the American League in earned runs last year in 99. So, not a great accolade there. There's a lot of stuff you'd love pitchers to lead the baseball in. Earned runs allowed is not one of them. So, I do think Griffin caning is fixable. I don't know if Atlanta wants to do it at the projected $5.1 million arbitration figure. At the same time, I can't imagine Atlanta would have traded for him were they not planning on keeping him and fixing him. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Maybe you see him moved today to somebody else who needs a starter who thinks they can fix him. But it feels as of now, my assumption is that they're going to pick up the $5.1 million option. I believe these 5 arbitration salaries together, I had this math here, come out to about $10.6 million, which would bring the luxury tax payroll to about $226, which still keeps you under the $241 first limit. We did this whole financial breakdown last week again, but $226, you are $15 million away from the first luxury tax threshold. You're 35 away from the second, right? And you can spend probably closer to $60 million when you factor in the higher thresholds if you want to get to the same place you were last year as far as amount before the third threshold, which is where the draft pick penalties come in for going over. So as of now, I think my expectation is all 5 of these guys are tendered contracts. But if one of them is not, it's, in my mind, it's either caning or Laureano. I think if you don't tender Laureano, it's just a free agency thing. Unless somebody wants to go trade you for him. But I doubt that. I think caning could potentially have trade value simply because a lot of folks are going to look at what he did and say the Angels were bad last year. We have a better team around him. And you always need innings right? It's really hard to find starter innings in Major League Baseball. Look at a team like the Brewers, who I think they used 370 different starters last year. One of those two, if somebody gets non-tendered today, it's one of those two guys. And I think Canning's a better option for somebody to pick up via trade than Laureano. But other teams could non-tender guys as well, and you might see Atlanta trade for one of them. I'll break down those options next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby talking about tonight's non-tender deadline and possible trades the Braves may make prior to that deadline. Because every team has players where the arbitration salary is probably going to be higher than you would expect or than you would want to pay them. So I've gone through and I picked out a couple names that I think would be interesting. The Giants have 4 guys on the list, right? Lamonte Wade Jr., first base and left field. Tyler Rogers, the pitcher. Camilo Doval, not sure which one. The reliever, the former closer who got demoted last year to the minors. And then Mike Yastrzemski, the right fielder. I do think, as much as I like the idea of Yastrzemski, the last couple years, he's been a league average hitter. He was really good to start his career. He's now mostly league average. He plays right field. He is a lefty. I think this year he batted like .230, 18 homers. I will point out, that's not the best ballpark for lefty power. It is deep in right field. So it's possible he'd be a little bit better. He's turning age 34. He's projected to make almost $10 million. I don't know if Atlanta's going to be comfortable paying $10 million to Mike Yastrzemski instead of $6 million to Ramon Laureano. They do also lefty hitting Lamonte Wade. His arbitration salary is projected to be less. He does have experience in both right and left field. He hasn't played a lot of the outfield in recent years. The last time he played a season with more, I believe, than 10 starts in the outfield was 2022. He made 35 starts in the outfield. He played 116 games at first in 23 and 94 at first in 2024. So I'm not 100% confident that he's going to be, I guess, a better option. But I do think Camilo Doval could potentially be a guy that they go out to get. I want to say he's owed around 4.6 or so. Yes, it is possible, again, that you see one of these Giants outfielders, Yastrzemski, or again, Lamonte Wade, even though he's more of a first baseman than an outfielder. But I just don't like the salaries on those. You'd have to assume Atlanta would wait for them to get non-tendered and then talk to them in free agency. Somebody interesting that would solve something for the Braves, it's Jorge Mateo of the Orioles. Entering his age 30 season, he turns 30 next June. He is projected, I believe I have that here, projected at $3.2 million. Now, he gives you exceptional speed. He's one of the fastest players in baseball, which is not really something that you've had. His best season from a performance standpoint was 2022. His batting average was not good. 221 with a 379 slug. So it was 646 OPS, which sucks, right? Led the American League with 35 stolen bases. Played shortstop all year. No innings anywhere else but shortstop. With plus 10 outs above average. He also has experience at second, at third, and all 3 outfield positions. Provided you think he's healthy, he had UCL repair on his non-throwing arm. He's expected to be back for most of the season in 2025. We don't quite know exactly when he will return. But defensively, he can hold his own just about anywhere. And again, the last time he was a starter at shortstop for a full season in 2022, while his batting average wasn't great, defensively he was good. He was a stolen base threat. This is one of the slowest teams in baseball with all of these veterans that you have. So having a stolen base threat as either a utility guy off the bench / starter at second base when Ozzy always gets hurt, or if he were to beat out Orlando Arcia or you were to bench Arcia and put Mateo in at short, would give you an interesting dynamic. The flip side of this is, other than one small sample size with Baltimore in 2021, 32 games, 116 plate appearances where he batted .280, he's not been a great hitter. .224 batting average, .270 on base in his career with a .639 OPS. But, again, he would be projected $3.2 million. He could be a shortstop option that you see Atlanta say, hey, we need more options at shortstop. We're going to go look at Jorge Mateo. Same thing if there's other guys like this. Taylor Walls, $1.3 million with the Rays. I imagine they'll pick up his contract. I don't remember loving his defense. Tyler Wade of the Padres, utility guy, can play everywhere. Remember him playing third while Machado was DHing after the injury. Zach McKinstry of the Tigers can play a lot of places. If any of those were to get non-tendered, maybe McKinstry or Wade, but I feel like you're not going to see many non-tenders out of that group. Outfielders. This could be another option where you see the Braves say, hey, we're going to go find a guy. Dylan Carlson of the Rays. This is a really interesting option because he looked really good early in his career before he just lost it and has never really found it. He was the third place finisher for Rookie of the Year in 2021, batted .266 with 18 homers in 149 games. Only stole 2 bases, but he played all 3 outfield positions, mostly right, but played some left and center. Since then, though, his batting averages per year, .236, .219, .209. He's not been great. Tampa Bay acquired him at the deadline. 37 games for them. He hit 3 homers. He batted .219 with a .615 OP. His slugging was .316. So they are, I'm guessing, are probably could move on from him. The issue there is they did just trade Jose Siri to the Mets, which, side note, if you're a Braves fan, if you think the Mets can fix Jose Siri, then you should be worried about that, because Jose Siri he has every tool you could possibly want from an athletic standpoint. He just has no plate discipline to speak of. But if he can get hot and put it together, Jose Siri can single-handedly win you games. He's an amazing defender in center field, incredibly fast, arm is huge. He just can't stop swinging at everything. So if they can get some plate discipline in Jose Siri, that could be terrifying. But anyway, I don't know if Dylan Carlson gets moved simply because Jose Siri just got moved, but they could non-tender him rather than pay him $2.7 million. Austin Hayes, $6.4 million by the Phillies. They thought he was going to be the guy after the trade. They got him from the Orioles. He just never really hit in Philly. I'm surprised they didn't try to give him a standing ovation to help his feelings or anything. But you could see them move on from him. I don't know if the Braves would be willing to trade for him at $6.4 million, knowing that Laureano would cost you $6.1, and you've at least seen him work out in that ballpark. But it's an option. Another possible non-tender, I'm just going through a list in my head here, MJ Melendez of the Royals. Converted catcher, played in the outfield. Another guy I think has tons of potential and just really hasn't figured it out yet. Looking at this, $2.5 million is the arbitration projection. I would absolutely be willing to take a flyer on MJ Melendez at $2.5 million. Worst case scenario, if Ronald takes a while to come back, if you have Laureano, you could platoon him and Kelnick. See what happens. And then you have an emergency catcher behind either Murphy and Tromp or Murphy and Baldwin. You have, because he, again, converted catcher, he's caught before. He can be, an emergency guy you can throw back there, and he can at least hold his own for the rest of a game, which I'd be worried about. I don't know who our backup catcher is, our emergency catcher. I'm assuming it's Luke Williams. I don't really know, but you'd have more confidence in that. Pitchers, couple options here. Tristan McKenzie, Sticks McKenzie, got hurt last year. I believe, actually, now that I think about it, I think he agreed to a deal to avoid free agency. So maybe that's not an option anymore, to avoid arbitration. But you could see some of these guys. Reliever Hunter Harvey might be somebody. I could see Patrick Sandoval of the A's as a guy that is non-tendered. He had a Tommy John in, I think, June of last year with an internal brace. He's supposed to miss most of this season. Honestly, I think the most likely outcome is he gets non-tendered and signs a 2-year deal with somebody, because he's 28. That would put him, he'll miss most of next season. He could return late in the year, get a full season at age 30, and then enter free agency at that. But maybe that's something where Atlanta trades for him because he's going to get non-tendered by the Angels, and then signs him to that 2-year deal. Give him a low salary in year 1, give him a more decent salary in year 2, and you can spread the AAV out. Similar to what happened to Brandon Woodruff of the Brewers, where he got non-tendered and then he re-signed with Milwaukee on a 2-year deal because he was going to miss all of this season, all of 24, with after shoulder surgery. Similar thing here for Patrick Sandoval. This is going to be really interesting to watch. There's a lot of pieces. Some of these don't make sense, right? Brendan Rodgers wouldn't make sense for Atlanta, things like that. But reliever Hunter Harvey of the Royals, they got him from the Nationals. It did not work out. He went on the injured list with a back problem, missed 6 weeks. But $4 million, had really good ERAs and strikeout numbers with Washington, although he's been hurt with injury. Maybe the Royals don't want to pay $4 million if they don't know what the status is of that. Another team Atlanta's traded a lot with. Maybe they go and turn around and make a deal for Hunter Harvey. David Bednar of the Pirates. Down year last year. I believe he actually lost his closing job for the Pirates. He's owed like $6.6 million. Maybe he gets let go. So interesting. We'll see what happens. Again, that deadline is tonight. We'll probably have updates as anything significant happens. We'll break it all down either in Emergency Pod over the weekend or on Monday's episode of Braves Today. In the meantime, listen on audio. Do us a favor. Leave us a 5-star review. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so that when we drop a new episode, also leave a 5-star review with some nice words of affirmation, because we always love that. And until next time, this has been Braves Today.